feedback. Patricia, Oliver.
My name is Patricia Oliver, and I'm an attorney for Save Porter Ranch, and I represent about 7,535 individuals in this area. And I think what you've heard from the community here today is a moral challenge. A moral challenge of saying you want to have influence on all of us. You come to our community to tell us how you're going to identify health issues from this blowout. And the only way, and you just heard, the battle's impossible. And the only way in a moral challenge to win an impossible battle is to fight for each other. And you have heard all of these voices challenging the two of you and all of Aqmd staff members here to go back and fight for each other. And that each other now, if you want to have influence, is now Porter Ranch. It is not SoCal Gas. It is not Aqmd employees and management. It's the people here. So the moral challenge for you is, do you represent the people you seek to influence, or do you represent the people who are signing your paychecks? I hope and I pray that in this challenge, in this moral challenge, you go back and you fight the impossible battle, which means you fight for the people of Porter Ranch.
We're not here trying to influence anyone. We're trying to...
You're not? Then why are you here?
We're trying to get feedback on the scope of what we can do with the resources that were provided to us. We're not... I've never said...
But you're asking to be trusted to get feedback. That means you want to have some influence on us, enough to have us trust you to share. But you've just answered the question. You just told them you're not a legitimate representative of this community. That's fine. That's cool. We get it.
I clearly didn't say that.
Well, you clearly did. You clearly did. So let me start then by some of the substantive comments. You know, like the moral part of it, got it, we understand. We already knew that, but it's unfortunate that you had to admit it. So, now, let's talk seriously. In this report, you supposedly identified that you want to just get data from the public agencies. Now, leaving aside the questions that were raised earlier about the conspicuous use of the same labs for public agencies in SoCal Gas, leaving that issue aside, there is very valuable data that you should be getting. And there's valuable data that you should be getting from SoCal Gas. So let's start with their SEC filings, where for decades they reported unaccounted for gas. You know why? Because it means the gas couldn't be located. It was no longer in the reservoirs. So why don't you start getting their data about unaccounted for gas and figuring out, where did that gas go? Why are there problems with the air in the community even before a blowout? So there is unaccounted for gas that you can start tracking. Other data that you could be trying to get is all of the test reports so that you get a complete review. Because according to CARB, and I'm sure you've read their report, it's excellent reports, they talk about the whole hillside emitting gases. So why don't you make sure you're looking at all of the data from SoCal Gas too? It's an important data reference point that should be considered. And when you're doing that, there should be point source testing. And I'm sure as PhDs who understand this, you know what point source testing is and you know why it matters. Now, to the extent you don't understand the point source testing in oil and gas operations, you'd want to make sure you knew what the gas looked like before it was scrubbed by the dehydration systems, before all the bad chemicals were removed. Because what the community was exposed to was that bad stuff, meaning it wasn't even pure gas at that point. It hadn't been scrubbed. So what are all those chemicals? And as you know, all of those ambient air testing can be completely dumbed down, which is part of the reason you have a community who's rebelling against what you're saying, because they all know you can dumb down data, just like you can fudge a smog test. You can fudge all kinds of air tests. So pull up the data about the actual chemicals as they existed underground, so that the fudging of data through fake air tests are really addressed. Now,
so you know we have some of that data.
Some. That's exactly the point. But you pull all of that data, and you have the right to request it, and you now know there's unaccounted for gas. You now know how to track down the dehydration issues. So track it down. What is scrubbed from the gas? Those are the chemicals people want to know about. when you're talking about, I just want to say, you're saying, look, we don't see any connection between the health problems and the chemicals. Now, Aqmd should know some of the chemicals that come out of this facility because of the way that they already come out of the compressors and the reports through the air toxic hotspots. So it's curious that some of the chemicals that are in massive amounts in the homes that were identified by Dr. Nordella, if you looked at his reports, like acrolein, SoCalGas quit reporting about that in about 2005 to Aqmd, after they were one of the worst in the entire state for emissions of acrolein. And yet here, it's nearly 100% of the houses during the blowout in unoccupied homes. And you can start looking at the connection between acrolein and the health problems, and you might go, hey, there's not a data gap. Respiratory distress, holy buckets, there's a connection. So look at what Aqmd knows. Look, that's not a data gap. That's not a, we have a health problem and we don't know what's causing it. You have it. So start looking at all of that information. Then you might have the ability to have people come out here and give really substantive comments and quit fighting about $1 million. Because frankly, again, $1 million, if you're fighting an impossible battle and you're choosing to battle for each other, you can win.
One of the options presented is to get all that data by an independent expert to gather all the data and do that same type of exposure assessment you're talking about. The acrolein comes out of the sources that are point source tested, which are compressors and engines. That's not what was going on during the leak. What was going on during the leak was you can't point source test that. There's no protocol for the large point source testing, the largest leak of methane. But we did get as close as we can in the leak. We know it was coming out during the leak. We took samples very close, figured out high levels of methane. We could ratio things off of that. We kind of know the content of what was coming out. Later on, we sampled the gas that's being stored. We have that data. That's all available. And what we're saying is, you can look at all that data, and when we look at it, nothing explains the health symptoms we're seeing. It doesn't mean there's no health symptoms. It's just you can't connect the dots with the information we have.
Then look at the MSDSs and look at the chemicals and look at the health problems, because I beg to differ with you because I've looked at those same data.
Well, it's not a matter of just finding the presence of a chemical. It's a matter of you have to go all the way.
And your client comes into you and says, hey, we're having respiratory distress, we're having this problem, it curiously matches. Oh, I guess we can't connect the dots. But here it goes back to the final point. And this is why everybody sitting here knows that what you're doing is you're being about mouthpiece for SoCalGas. You're saying we can't prove definitively, as if somehow to prove something logically requires that you prove it as reliably as the sun's going to come out tomorrow. That is not what's required in the law, nor the air toxic hotspots, nor do I dare say in science. I'm sitting here looking at that tablecloth, and I can reasonably believe that Aqmd brought that tablecloth and put that on the table, and that they made it because it's got their name on it. But can I definitively prove that? No, I cannot. Definitively proving it is not something that you're required to do. So you're speaking for SoCalGas. And if that's what you want to do, you've already made it clear at the beginning of what we heard that you don't want to influence the community, you don't want to protect them. Now you're just saying how, look, I'm going to use SoCalGas terms. We've got to definitively prove it. Like we're proving the sun's coming out tomorrow.
We never said
really?
We needed to prove anything.
You said definitively you can't prove the causation. We just want you to understand the problem with all of this is we can't prove causation. What's the legal standard for causation, or what's the legal standard under air toxic hotspots?
We're not talking about legal standards. All we said was that when you're doing an epidemiological study, you're looking at populations and you're looking at exposure and you're looking at statistics. You're not ever saying that this particular person
definitively got this from this problem.
Particular thing. But these studies aren't designed to do that. The courts may be designed to do that, but these types of studies aren't designed to do that.
I think what you've just done is you put everything you can in here so that what happens when people look at this, they go, yeah, we can't prove SoCalGas caused any problems. You really want to sit here and look at the audience here and say, yeah, we want to make sure that we put in here no causation. How dare you even suggest that is. You said, Matt Pacuco asked, Multiple people have asked, and you said we can't prove definitively. That's not what science requires, that's not what the law requires, but that's what you are telling the community. Looks curious to say the least.
You're managing expectations.
We're not saying you can't, in a court of law or in other cases, prove that causation. All we're saying is that large-scale health studies cannot prove that. What they can prove is that, or they can show associations of exposure and outcomes. They can definitively say that we think this exposure caused this set of outcomes. We could say it increased the risk 200 times or 300 times or 1,000 times of that outcome. That's a strong finding. We can't say any individual in that population definitively had that effect. But we can work in odds, it's still a very strong finding. So I think you're twisting what we were trying to express there. I understand the legal aspect of it. There's courts for that. There's many courts who have made decisions that have, provided settlements to clients who are making those claims, and that's for the courts to decide. We are talking about scientific health studies. We're not talking about tort claims.
But the air toxic hotspots, as I'm sure you know, the whole point of that law is so that you can say, look, these are the chemical emissions, these are the people getting sick.
No, that's wrong. It's saying these are the risks posed to the people that are exposed. We don't say that person. That's not what it does.
You're splicing things.
No.
You're saying you want it definitive, like the sun will come up tomorrow. That's what you're saying. But when I tell you that, you're saying, no, that's not what we're really saying.
We're not saying we want definitive. We're saying these studies can't answer that. That's not the goal of the studies, is to make the definitive proof. It's up to you. What we're saying is these studies develop associations between emissions, exposure, and risk. And again, on a population basis, you can make strong conclusions. On an individual basis, they're just not designed to do that. There's other procedures for that. And toxic hotspots is a great example. It all is based on risk. It's all based on odds. We say the same thing when we go out and do toxic hotspots meetings, that this can never prove or show that any individual has a health outcome due to exposure. We say the exact same words for that we're saying here.
If those toxic hotspots have been studied and exposed, it could potentially lead to what this community wants.
Absolutely.
So shut it down. Stop exposing them.
Okay.
I get your point as a science person. You're just saying it doesn't apply to the individual, but yet it's an increased incidence of a percentage to a group of population. But that's what we want. We want that data, because once you have that data, then people like Patricia can take it to court and get the people who are supposed to shut this down through the politics and the court systems to get what the people want. Stop exposing them to toxins.
So, great. So if that's the objective the community wants, is to get data to support that type of work, we can take that back. Again, it could take a lot of money to do that. We can see what we can do for $1 million. And if we can get even a small step in that direction, let us know what you want. Let us know what we can do.
Well, I think what I've heard here today is enough. And no offense to either one of you, because I do respect your schooling. You're not the agency that has the ability to do this. You need to farm it out. I understand that. But you should not be in control of the selection. The community should. Now, maybe as a constructive comment here is to have you work with the community and you do your vetting, but the community makes the final decision on who is to do that study and apply the $1 million independently to them.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. We can
Yeah.
talk about that.
That's what we want.
We have a suggestion.
What's that?
Yeah,
Do you have something? We have more cards here.
probably a good place to start, back here.
Dr. Nordella.
Yeah.
He's concurring.
Did you put in a card, Doctor?
I did not.
Would you like to say a few words? You're being nominated. You can take the mic.
I mean, I listened to what you had stated, and I see a lot of issues. First of all, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but we already studied 100 patients in a clinical study. I independently did the history and physical on each of the patients. I did the EKGs, the chest x-rays, the blood work as a screen. We then went and did the toxin studies on the hair and the urine and presented it at a town hall. And we had found what we found. I'm sure your people have looked at it. I'm sure public health has looked at it. The issue is there are chemicals in the community that should not be here. There are clinical symptomatology in this community that is not related to a typical allergy. Okay, I've done this for 33 years in a primary care setting, and the patients that I've seen here in Porter Ranch on one man, understand, are totally different from patients I've seen in prior years. So, all of that data has been done. I want to comment on Kaiser. You are not going to be able, in my opinion, to efficiently extrapolate data from Kaiser. Kaiser is a capitated healthcare system. I cannot tell you all the patients that I've seen every time they walked into their Kaiser physician or any capitated physician that they said they poo-pooed their symptoms. They did not look at them. They did not work them up. You will not find data there. Number two, if you had read the Casper study, you would find out that 70% of the patients that actually did present to a physician, you would found that they either went to a family practice doctor or to an urgent care. And on that basis, you're not going to find it in an emergency room. I practiced in emergency rooms for 7 years. They're quick, and they're out. So as far as getting the data for that type of study, I don't think it's going to work. I think looking at the epidemiology of the community, who is sick? How are they sick? Who made the diagnosis? What was done in their workup? From blood markers to CT to MRI to whatever. And start extrapolating the data there to see and compare, which you probably have, or not necessarily you, but the proper agency has the data within parallel communities that are not exposed to it. So you have control groups to run it again. It is not hard. We extrapolated a lot of data from this community with $7,000. $1 million? I know a lot of people say, and to me, I'll give you my opinion, I think the $30 million was a setup because it was equal to causation. And if you don't spend $30 million, you will not find causation. And causation is liability. So therefore, we're never going to get the $30 million. So as the community keeps coming to me and say, Dr. Nordella, we need a health study. I said, you're never going to get a $30 to $40 million health study. It's not going to happen. But we can do real positive things if we take us out of the legal and the political arena and put us directly about the patient.
Okay,
That
so
would be my statement.
we've heard a couple of times. Good suggestions. We've heard a couple of times that a lot of good work has been done for not very much money, a lot of donated time, I assume. But let's talk. Let's make some suggestions. If you want to do some of the work you're doing, what you described there, it could be expensive, but there might be ways to do it within our resources. And then maybe more money can follow if we can work on that. But we did put up here that getting information from a private practice was one of the things that we were going to try to do. So, that's a good suggestion. And if people have study designs or other ideas like that, where we are open, we're not here telling you what we're going to do. We're here to try to make this money go as far as it can and benefit the community as much as it can.
Why don't you release the money to the community? Yes.
Release the what?
The $1 million. Why should you be in charge of that money? It goes to the...
I can take that back. There are legal restrictions in the settlement, as you've seen. If there were, we can look at that.
By Aqmd?
No, it's just the language that was signed in the settlement. That's all. The only thing we have. That's our only
The
restriction.
Aqmd get $8.5 million, and only $1 million goes to the residents who are sick, and that should come to the community. You should have no say about that $1 million. It should just go to the community.
We will take that back.
It's our money, after all. It's our money.
We will take that back. If there's a way to do that within the settlement terms, we can try to figure something out. But settlement terms, you've all seen them. It requires a health study. It requires, it's pretty broad, but it has some very specific aspects that would be included. And you know, we can look at what can be done. It seems like there's some good ideas here for a community-based study, and we can take that back. I think, you know, we're not so far off. It may sound like it, that a lot of our proposals are, you know, are very different than what you want, but there's some similarities there. So I think there's room to work. Obviously, there's not enough money to do everything. There's not enough money to get the definitive answers, but I think we can do some good.
If the community gets $1 million, they know what to do with it. So I think that's the best solution. Don't you guys agree?
Well, so if something like that was going to happen, and obviously I can't promise, what I'm doing is trying to take information back to my bosses, my board, is you'd have to tell us first what you're going to do with it, right? You'd have to, a blank check is probably not going to work under the terms of the settlement.
So why does it work for you? Why does it work for you? A blank check,
Because-
$1 million
because
works for you?
We're not treating it, it's not a
You're
blank check.
the
It's not a
injured
blank
party here.
It's not a-
This is
we
just
have-
a job,
we
but
have
we have an
restrictions.
injured. So it
I
should go to
understand.
the community, it should go to us, and it should have no say about it.
Okay. So any more cards? And it's 9:20, so you really got to get going. Before we go, I think we got useful feedback in a lot of different ways. Would you like us to come back? We could come back in a month. We could come back in 2 months. We could compile all this information. Is it worth your time? We want this to be, you know, have community involvement. Would you like us to come back and give you progress on where we are with the study scope?
Yeah, so come back in 1 month. You said
1
maybe
month?
1 month or 2 months. Come back in a month and let's see where maybe
Okay.
what your people say.
Just because of the holidays, can you give us 6 weeks to put something together towards the end of January, beginning of February?
May I speak?
Yeah.
Helen, may I?
I just wanted to suggest, come back with governing board members so we can answer some of the questions.
We can ask. We relay that request.
Thank you.
My name is Issam, Najm. I want to thank you for being here today. It's not an easy topic, and it is very difficult to separate you from the Aqmd as this community views the Aqmd. So we have a huge hurdle to overcome, and you have a huge hurdle to overcome. One thing I do want to ask the community, what we have in front of us is a number of options. Let me ask you this. Would you rather have a limited $1 million study, or would you rather say it is better not to have a study?
Depends what the study is.
My only point is this. We have the option of a limited study that none of us is satisfied with. There is another option. Say, you know what? This community does not want to study unless it is a sufficient study. If that's what the community would like to say, then go in that direction. We can't go in the direction that they have no say in. So if we'd rather not have a study at all, if it's going to be limited, then say that. If you want to wait till we get additional money, just recognize that that also goes against our urgent request to get it done already. So do we really want to wait longer? That is the downside of waiting for additional money. So my suggestion is, let us start. It is not what we want, but the alternative is nothing. And if that's would rather make us feel better to have nothing than to have something stunted, then say it. But as you know, the settlement is done. Whether they can gather other money to come in, that may be an open question. But that takes time, and we need to decide, do we want to play along with what we have in our hands? Or do we say, keep it, we don't want it because it's not good enough for us? You know, that is an option. That is an option. But you need to let them know which of those two options you want. Those are the two in front of us. They both stink, but we have to make a choice and we have to move. So, I'm not giving you any suggestions on that because I clearly don't reflect the level of emotion that the community has about this.
Can I make a suggestion then?
Go ahead.
Because both of those positions are perfectly valid positions, we would understand. We said we'd come back in 6 weeks. I mean, one of the things we're thinking of just coming back to the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council, your house, instead of us setting up the meeting, and give those updates. If that's acceptable to everyone, that's fine. And maybe, you know, within your group and within the community, from what you heard tonight, you could start talking about that decision you have to make. And then when we come back, you could, you know, give us that feedback.
But let me ask you, you know, obviously we have two sides talking totally different languages. So when you come back, what would it be that is different from what we have now?
Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take back all the feedback we have, talk to our bosses, maybe we'll have videos, there'll be other things. We have all your cards you submitted, we have all the one-page surveys. We're going to go over all of it. We could summarize it. We could go to our bosses, see if we need to change direction, see if there's other ideas we can work on. We will work with our expert partners because we're not the experts in everything, as many of you have pointed out. So we'll do that. We may not have final answers. We want to get more feedback, but we're not gonna. We want to go quickly, but there's no sense in us disengaging from the community and doing only what we think is right or what we think we want to do.
Okay.
Right? We're hoping the community will work with us. If they don't, that's a perfectly valid position. We'll have to reassess what we do next. But if we came back 5 or 6 weeks, I think we'd have a good summary. We have new ideas. We could go back. We could talk to some experts about budget if we did some of these ideas. If there's ways, call you Dr. Nordella for follow-up. We can work on some things. We're not going to have final answers, and also so we can present our new ideas, and you can give us additional feedback on how you guys feel about participation.
Then let me suggest in those 6 weeks, that is our decision point. We stay on the course, or we get off. So that's we need that decision point.
2 points. 2 points. If it's an insufficient study, it shouldn't be done. Because what is to stop all of the agencies from using it as data to say, let it run?
And that is the option that I'm saying is on the table.
That's the risk. Number two, because we're looking at a time crunch, why don't we have your bosses here at the next 6-week meeting? I mean, I got things to do with my time. I'm not getting paid for any of this, and I come to these, and I'm my own boss, so.
So since I'm not my own,